Hey there, welcome back to Care Anywhere. Excited about today's episode. We're going to be jumping in on a topic that is really critical and relevant to the discussions around global health workforce and the development and advancement of health careers around the world. We hear a lot in industry about data security and data integrity. We certainly hear a lot in the news about cyber threats and hackers and issues around data security. But one of the things that we don't hear a lot about, especially around the education and credentialing space, is about fraud, how prevalent it is, what the drivers are around fraudulent activities when it comes to academic credentials, transcripts, certifications, etc. So important when you're looking at roles like ours, where we are assessing and verifying that people are who they say they are, and they've had the training and the credentialing that they need to take their careers and move into global health systems and have a downstream impact on patient care. I'm joined today by two of my colleagues at CGFNS, Emily Say and Jason Wessel, who are part of our Global Health Workforce Development Institute. They're both experts in this area, and we're going to dive deep today on what the drivers are and what it means to have a rigorous fraud posture when it comes to academic degrees and credentials. So stick around. This episode starts now. Across global health systems, health workers on the front lines of care delivery are carrying more on their shoulders today than ever before. Workforce shortages are increasing, scope of practice is shifting, and skill sets are definitely evolving. In this podcast, we're setting the table for some powerful discussions with nurses, allied health professionals, regulators, tech innovators, and other thought leaders across the globe. Together, we're diving deep on the challenges and opportunities that loom large for recruiting, training, and equipping the health worker of the future. Welcome to Care Anywhere, the Global Health Workforce Podcast, brought to you by CGFNS International. Welcome back, everybody, to Care Anywhere. Glad to have you with us today. Welcome, Jason and Emily. Love having you on the podcast. We're going to be talking about fraud in the education and credentialing space, something that we're very mindful of at CGFNS. I would love for you, each of you, to introduce yourselves, starting with Emily. Tell our audience a little bit about you and your background, especially as it pertains to our subject matter today.
Yes, thanks for having us, Leah. My name is Emily Tsay. I'm the Senior Director of Knowledge Management within the Global Health Workforce Development Institute at CGFNS. And I've had over 20 years of experience in the credential evaluation field. I actually came to CGFNS from International Education Research Foundation, also known as IERF, which is the first credential evaluation agency in the US. Fraud is a topic that I'm very passionate about, not because I like to play policewoman and catch all the crooks, but it's just about being responsible and vigilant so that we can protect the public, especially when it comes to things like patient safety. So in the past, I have presented and written on the topic of fraud, including an article in the Journal of Nursing Regulation, as well as a chapter in a recent publication put out in 2021 by the American Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers, ACRO, with the book entitled Bogus Institutions and Documents. So yeah, very happy to come here and talk about fraud.
Awesome. Thank you. Jason, your background.
Yes, I'm the Director of Standards here at CGFNS, also in the Institute. And I came here from another evaluation agency. It's called ECE, or Educational Credential Evaluators. And I was there for about 30 years. I did a variety of things, but a lot of it involved evaluation and looking at issues like fraud. I think the issue of fraud is both important and really interesting. It's kind of, I know Emily talked about, not being the police on this issue, but it is kind of, it's kind of like detective work in some respects. And I guess if, once you start running into those issues, it can get really interesting, and you don't want to fall victim to it. So it's something that, as an evaluator, can kind of stay forefront in your mind. As to the prevalence of it in the world, that's hard to say. I guess it depends on the context. the evaluation agency or the school that's reviewing the documents and what their policies and procedures are and what type of documents they require. I think, though, in general, it's probably not a high percentage. I could be wrong, but I don't think it's a huge percentage. The problem is that even a few is an issue. Each of them, creates a lot more work. It slows you down, which takes time away from the other cases where there are legitimate documents. And if you let one through, it's pretty damaging. So if you have to retract a report or contact an institution that's using your report and say, hey, sorry, we just discovered after the fact that this document turns out was not legitimate. That's a real problem. I mean, your reputation and trustworthiness of the institution can be called into question. So even if it's not a huge percentage of cases where you might run into that, again, it can be very damaging. Sure. And so, and you have to approach every case with that in mind because you just don't know when it's going to come up.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So you jumped ahead there, and I'm glad you did, because we are going to talk a little bit about, laying the groundwork for how prevalent it is and what motivates folks to do it, especially in this space. So let's just lay a little groundwork around the subject of fraud to orient our audience to begin with. We talk a lot about data security. You hear a lot about identity theft, cyber threats across industry, but we don't hear as much about fraud. And there is a cost and impact not only to industries, but to individual businesses and to individuals. So I was looking up the definition of fraud, which was interesting. Fraud refers to a person or thing intended to deceive others, typically by unjustifiably claiming or being credited with accomplishments or qualities. I thought that was a powerful definition. So at a basic level, fraud involves intentional deception. And usually that deception involves false claims about someone's accomplishments, or, as we see in healthcare billing or in the finance industry, someone's services. So when you look at fraudulent billing in healthcare, it's really about claiming that you're delivering services at a level of expertise that you don't. Is that a fair definition, you guys would say? There's deception and misrepresentation of accomplishments or abilities, which I think is a great foundation for us to begin. So again, Emily, we'll flip over to you because Jason really kind of already answered this. How prevalent is it in the education and career management space? And maybe more importantly, what motivates it? Because it might seem that that's too big a risk for someone to take when you consider how important someone's skills and knowledge are to them actually being able to do a job. So you are almost stepping into a risk space if you choose to be fraudulent in this area. But I'm curious what motivates it, what drives that, and then, again, how much do you see it in the industry, so that we can jump in on the topic of how to detect it and how to prevent it, some of the things that we do at CGFNS.
Absolutely. So I would say it's human nature to want to get the best product or experience for the least amount of money and effort. That's human nature. But the problem with fraud is when you take it too far. And so with that, then you might achieve a spot at a university, employment, or licensure when you're unprepared for that, when you talk about the risk. And that's the thing that astounds me, that people are willing to put forth fraudulent credentials and want to work as a nurse or physician or what have you without having the proper training. That is bold. I definitely don't have that personality, but there are plenty that are out there. And, we are a credential-based society. In the U.S. alone, there's so much weight that's placed on university-based education versus vocational technical education, which I personally think is a shame, but that's just sort of where we're at. And so people are motivated to try and find shortcuts. So there's the issue of being underprepared or undertrained, and then there's also the issue of taking a spot from someone who's also more deserving. So there's so many issues at play here, and I think that plays at why it is prevalent. It's not huge statistically, but it is problematic. And so you have to be vigilant and do your due diligence.
Yep. Yeah. So how easy is it for someone to get a fake credential? Emily?
So I would say, clearly with the advancement of technology, it's very easy to produce and make fake credentials. But not only that, but also to buy it and sell it, especially online nowadays.
Right.
That said, there are also places where you can go in person. The example that comes to my mind is Recto University, which is a nickname for an area near the University Belt in Manila, Philippines, where you can go. For example, imagine a farmer's market where you have stalls of fresh produce, but instead of fresh produce, you go into stalls and you can see a variety of fake credentials that you can buy, be it academic
Wow.
credentials, driver's licenses. So the nickname is Recto University. I think another name that's been given is Xerox Alley. And several years ago, there was a reporter from the UK that went and bought a fake nursing degree and a fake nursing license, those cards that we often see from the PRC,
Yep.
Professional Regulation Commission. And he shared about that experience, showing just how easy the transaction is. But yeah, you get it on websites, and they are very good at showcasing all your different choices. And so we've joked as evaluators that they could be used for training, because you can see what the credential is supposed to look like at the different levels of different varieties from different countries. I also had an experience where we had a military sergeant walk in with a credential wanting us to confirm that is the equivalent of a high school diploma, because he needed to make sure that the person satisfied the requirements to recruit and enlist that person. So we're looking at this diploma and trying to make heads or tails out of it. We flip it over, and on the back in fine print, it says, "This is a novelty item." So we pointed it out to him.
Wow.
The sergeant, took the diploma back and then just quietly walked out of our office. I was a rookie evaluator at the time, so I wished I'd had
Wow.
photocopied and scanned that so I could, have that to refer to. But it is definitely, that experience is seared in my mind. It just shows, vendors don't just say this is for novelty purposes. So they're off the hook. They can't vouch for the intention to deceive, which is part of that definition that you gave for fraud.
Yeah, like walking into a gift shop and buying a copy of the Declaration of Independence
Yeah.
as a souvenir,
Yep.
right? So they put that little disclaimer on the back, and it gets them out of legal trouble. That's interesting. Jason, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think definitely with technology, it's easier to create and or obtain fake credentials, but that cuts both ways. I think it's, in some respects, it's also easier maybe to detect certain fake credentials, and in some respects it's maybe easier to get credentials directly from the primary sources and to verify them if you get them to be able to reach out to the source and say, hey, is this okay? Not always in all cases, but I think in some cases it is easier. So it's kind of a ongoing and evolving game. One side might make some technological progress or figure out how to do something differently that is novel, and then over time the other side will catch up and kind of plug that hole. So it's always this kind of ongoing incremental back and forth.
Yeah. It's always kind of mind-blowing to me the efforts to which people go to commit not only fraud, but cyber attacks and, hacking into other people's data. And there's just such a complex industry out there of people that are doing this, which is unfortunate, but it requires organizations across industry to have to be hyper vigilant about this stuff where data and credentials are concerned. So obviously vigilance around both fraud prevention and fraud detection is critical. It's critical to our business, where we have a health workforce that comes through our doors looking for us to validate their credentials and verify that they actually earn them so that they can, have career mobility and choices and upward mobility in their careers. So let's talk about best practices. And you guys are experts in this, and it's certainly shaped our fraud prevention and detection programs here. What are some of the best practices you recommend for actually detecting fraud? Because it's pretty nuanced from what I've seen in your presentations, Emily. So it'd be great for our audience to know what actually goes into detecting fraud with these credentials.
Absolutely. So, a lot of times people will ask, is there this one Bible or comprehensive resource that will teach you how to detect and prevent fraud? And as you say, unfortunately, it's nuanced. So there isn't one place or source. It really comes down to experience and practice. I always say, when you're talking about best practices and principles, the starting point is you got to know what the real ones look like before you can detect and sense what the fake ones look like, right? So that's
Yep.
where the experience and the practice really is important. So luckily with CGFNS, we've been doing this for nearly 5 decades. We're, quickly approaching our 50th anniversary. So we've accumulated all this experience. We have archives of credentials, from countries around the world and varying time periods, because educational systems and credentials can change. So again, the starting point, knowing what the real one looks like and paying attention to the features. The thing is now credentials can come in 2 forms, right? When you talk about transcripts and degree certificates, they can be paper form or electronic form, but the principles are still the same. I remember one time at my previous place of employment, we were asked to evaluate a set of credentials from someone from Russia, and this request was from the LA Unified School District, LAUSD. It was coming down to the wire because it was very close to the start of the school term, and they needed this teacher to fill this classroom. And this person had a PhD and was already previously licensed as a teacher in Canada. So they thought they had it in the bag. This was just a formality. And then we get the credentials and we're like, oh no. This is the transcript, so to speak, is on 8.5 by 11 paper. Now, 8.5 by 11 paper, that's something you see more in North America, for example. You definitely don't see it from Russia. So we said, we really can't move forward. We need to contact the school directly and verify these credentials. And that means, of course, then there's going to be a delay. And time was of the essence. So LAUSD was not happy with us, which made it for a very awkward situation. But we politely stood our ground and said, these are the concerns, starting with the 8.5 by 11 paper. It just, you don't see it in that part of the world. And so
it was a red flag.
Yeah, the huge red flag. Colors and all that also added to it, but that was like the first and foremost area of concern. So luckily the school did respond and confirm that it was indeed a forgery. So it was a no-go for that individual.
Wow. So Jason, where would you weigh in on best practices for not only fraud detection, but prevention? What can organizations do?
Even though, we're receiving documents in more different ways, digitally and through other and related means, I still think kind of the old-fashioned way is one of the best ways, and that's to review and compare every data point that someone submits as part of their application against all other data points that they've submitted. So compare everything, kind of point by point with everything else to make sure everything's consistent with their educational history, their biographical data, all that kind of stuff. Because that's one place where people can make mistakes if they're trying to mislead you. The other is to have good resources. So having what I call country files. So just essentially your database of documents that you've received in every case in the past. So you can compare each new case to those resources by country, by school, by credential. And that includes document features. Emily was mentioning about that. So you'll have colors, dimensions, design features, fonts, the terminology used on the document. There's a limited kind of terminology that's used on documents. You don't see a lot of language that kind of goes out what is necessary to be able to talk about someone's academic achievements. Even grammar, like if their first language is in English, but they're trying to present an English language document, there might be grammar problems. Stamps and signatures, obviously. Other things are serial numbers. Certain countries will have serial numbers that they use to make sure to control the official letterhead or documentation that they issue these documents on. So you can kind of see patterns in serial numbers over time and see if they match to the time frame. So I think it's always good to remember that if someone's trying to mislead you, it's not uncommon for them to make mistakes about small details.
So it sounds to me from both of you that the knowledge base you have to have about all of these, understanding the issuing authorities, the schools, the credentialing bodies that issue these credentials, really knowing what they look for and what their certificates look like is critical, because you have to be able to compare. You guys are basically putting a magnifying glass over all of these areas of the certificate and looking at that. I would think that the issuing authorities kind of have to stay ahead of these fraudulent actors as well. When I think about the evolution just my driver's license has gone through in my lifetime to stay ahead of people who make fake IDs, they now have holograms and all kinds of watermarks and things over them, and it always seems like we're just trying to stay one step ahead. But that also means for those who do evaluation and detection, you have to stay ahead as well to know what those certificate changes look like. So it's very much a nuanced, fine-tooth comb that you're going through, which is very interesting. Let's take a stop right there, because I want to talk about something that is fairly common and people may not know the definition of. It's not uncommon for people to seek out and pay for certificates and degrees with what the industry would refer to as diploma mills, which might not be a term familiar to everyone. Emily, what is a diploma mill? How do they operate, and why would people seek them out?
Yeah, so diploma mills is definitely something you want to be aware of when you're talking about the fraud space. It's one thing to have document fraud, but then there's also the issue of the recognition of the schools. So it's one thing, for example, if you attend a school, pay the tuition and complete the program from beginning to end and earn a credential, but the school or the program is not recognized. So when you have this situation, especially, for example, with a nurse, that means that although they end up with this degree, so to speak, because it's from an unrecognized school or program, they won't be able to practice as a nurse. So that's unfortunate. So you do have unrecognized institutions of study. Then you have diploma mills, where it's a fake school from beginning to end. And what they do is they, as I mentioned, there's very little, if any, study completed for the credential that these fake schools award. And what they do is they lure people into believing that they deserve an actual academic degree based on their life and work experience, their years of life and work experience. And of course, all experiences we learn from, and there can be credit given for those kinds of things. You talk about internships, field study, what have you, but not full, whole, entire academic degrees, and that's tricky. So let's say you're presented with credentials from a diploma mill, and you contact that school, not knowing it's a diploma mill, and ask them to verify that the credentials are authentic, that they indeed awarded them and issued them. And then so the fake school will say, yeah, we awarded it. So the thing is real, but what it represents, right? The studies that it represents is not real. And that's where the confusion is. And with diploma mills, they'll have shiny websites and confuse people, because especially now we have online programs which are recognized and do lead to degrees. So they confuse people further, and then they will claim accreditation from fake accrediting bodies referred to as accreditation mills. So it perpetuates the problem. So it's really important when you are dealing with credentials, whether it's in country or out of country, that you know who the legitimate recognition or accreditation bodies are, so that you can determine if that school or program is recognized.
Yeah. We used to call those matchbook programs. They'd be the names of degrees you could earn. They'd be on the back of a matchbook, and they were always a red flag. And so in that case, the fraudulent actors are really the schools, these, that stand up these programs, not necessarily those that are going through them. So it's got to be difficult for the person who's gone through, especially the non-accredited ones, to go through that and then realize I don't have the training or the skills or the credential to really move forward, and how often that happens. Jason, your thought on diploma mills or some of these accredited schools or non-accredited schools?
I think there's two main thorny issues there. One, it can be difficult to distinguish between a fake and a legitimate institution, or a diploma mill and a regular institution. The other issue is the terms diploma mill and fraud can be problematic. So I always say to be careful using those terms when you're talking about a specific school or a specific person. You can talk about them generally, but you should be careful, especially if you're talking outside, publicly about a specific school.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, as Emily said, most diploma mills are going to boast some form of accreditation or recognition. So then you have to not only worry about the status of the institution, now you have to worry about the status of the accreditation body. Um,
Yeah.
so with that, I mean, we all look to accreditation, and I think, generally speaking, you can do that, but you have to be prepared to kind of look behind the accreditation and look at the legal status of the school. So the question you'd ask, was this school established or empowered by law to award degrees? And that's not always easy to determine. Some countries it's easier than others, but if you can answer that question, then the accreditation issue kind of becomes moot.
Right.
Again, with the diploma mill and fraud terms, these are, we had provided a definition earlier, which I think is accurate, but they also have like legal definitions and standards of proof. And so you should avoid them with when referring to specific institutions or people, because they can be considered defamatory. And if someone,
Sure.
a lot of times the schools that are diploma mills are looking for that because they want to prove somehow that they're okay. And so they might actually be looking for, those kinds of statements on message boards and things like that in order to kind of intimidate people into accepting their credentials. But the problem would be is if someone does file a suit against you, which has happened, I've seen it, then your only defense is to prove that it's a diploma mill or to prove that they're committing fraud, and that's kind of difficult and costly. So it's just best to avoid those terms when you're talking publicly about specific things.
Yeah.
I usually talk about them factually, just say, well, we found no evidence that institution has the legal authority to award degrees from the relevant body in that country, and just kind of talk about it.
And even if they have been legally approved to an awarded degree, you can't make the assumption that the quality is the same across the board. I mean, there's variable standards of quality. So it's probably interesting and important for our audience to note that just because you can verify that a school issued a credential to that person, it's not necessarily indicative of their skill level or their ability to earn other credentials or move forward in the process. And that would be done later at an evaluation or comparability assessment stage, which is also something that we do, but that's not part of actually verifying that an issuing authority gave someone a credential. That's probably an important point to make, that you're not evaluating the quality necessarily of that educational experience, just the validity of the issuing authority and the credentials that you're looking at. So is that an important distinction to make, do you think, Emily?
Yeah, I would say that we're not making statements about the quality, but just making sure, for example, they're meeting whatever the minimum standards or requirements are.
Yeah. So you mentioned paper and digital credentials. Has the digital landscape made it easier or harder to deal with fraud? And Jason, I think you touched on that earlier, but Emily, your thoughts on digitization typically is a great move forward, but technology can also make it easier for people to commit fraud. So your thoughts on that would be great.
Yeah. So on the whole, we vote yes for digitization because it just, it talks about helping mobility and creating ease of access, right? Can you imagine having to go back to your school in another country and whatnot? So the digitization definitely makes it easier, but then it also, whatever can be used for good can also be used for bad. And so you talk about the falsification aspect. Luckily at CGFNS, we do leverage technology to prevent fraud. So for example, we receive academic records and verify records, professional records also, through our credential transfer portal. And this is a secure site, and only recognized accredited programs and schools and licensing authorities are allowed access onto the portal. And that includes not just making sure that the program and the school is recognized, but the appropriate representative that has the authority to verify their credential. So there is a robust vetting process before they're allowed access to our portal. And that way we are controlling things, using technology to control things at the point of entry.
Meaning, and we probably should go back and say this is the reason why CGFNS requires primary source verification. We don't get those credentials from the applicant. We get them from the issuing authorities, which eliminates maybe some of the things that would happen in the in between. So credential transfer portal certainly helps to grease the wheels for
Leah,
that as well.
thank you for mentioning that. I think because it's such a foundational principle at CGFNS, I take it for granted primary source verification. But that's,
we probably should mention that we only
right.
primary source.
So that's where the credential transfer portal comes in when we talk about digital records.
And we do have applicants that will say, it would be so much easier for me on my application process and take less time if you just let me upload my credentials myself or my copy of my transcripts or whatever. And no, we recognize that the integrity of the process that we're a part of requires us to get those credentials. And ultimately, that's in the best interest of the applicant and the industry and all parties and stakeholders that are involved. But we do get requests from our applicants to, speed that up. So I don't know if you guys want to touch on why primary source is important, but I think I think it's baked in to the concept of what we're doing around fraud detection and prevention. Jason, your thoughts on digital credentials and, how that's reshaping fraud detection and prevention?
Yeah, I think, as we've mentioned, it makes it easier for both sides. It makes it easier to create and obtain fake docs, but it also makes it easier maybe to deter and detect their use. I think it's important to say just because you've come up with a technological approach that tightens that up doesn't mean you still can't, or you still shouldn't be diligent, and because that's going to change. And at some point, somebody's going to figure out some way to maybe work that system. So I think it's important to not kind of get complacent, even though you have good technology on your side, to stay current about those issues, be prepared to adjust how you accept and review documents based on those kinds of changes. And there's always, even if you're getting the documents directly through a system like the credential transfer portal from the relevant authority, there's still opportunity for corruption, so that you're never going to have 100% assurance that what you're getting is 100% reliable. So you still have to still employ all the usual safeguards that you would and compare things.
Yeah. Your process doesn't necessarily change, but technology enables it. I would say that it's probably the same thing that could be said about any enabling technology that we've seen across industry. Technology is always going to enable bad actors to do deceptive things, to work around data and credentials and information, but it also empowers businesses and organizations to deploy deception techniques and capabilities that we wouldn't have had in a paper-based manual process world. So I think we're tracking with the rest of technology when we say that's got its pros and cons. Both sides of the coin can use it. All right, we are reaching the end of our time. This has been such a great discussion, and I've learned so much, and hopefully our audience has as well, about what really goes into. And I wish, Emily, we could show some of those side-by-side examples, because I've seen some of your slides for your presentations and conference presentations, and it's so fascinating how detailed the look you have to take at some of those certificates really is. But what have we not touched on yet? Any last comments or final thoughts before we sign off, Emily?
Yes. So again, the idea is, not about being, the strict police person and catching the crook and all that sort of thing. It's just, being vigilant, doing due diligence, protecting the public. And so we have, as we said, document fraud, we have diploma mills, accreditation mills. We also have, believe it or not, evaluation mills. Fraud comes in all shapes and sizes. So even credential evaluation reports can be falsified. And like you said, Lea, one wonders the efforts that people go through to do this if they would just do it the traditional way. It just seems so roundabout. But yes, there are falsified evaluation reports as well. So it's really important that you work closely with a recognized evaluation agency and make sure that the evaluation reports you receive are directly from them, whether it's through, for example, our CES Connect portal or what have you. But having that chain of custody, working with a trusted evaluation agency, and making sure that those falsified reports don't slip through.
Yep. Jason, final
Yeah,
thoughts?
fake reports. I think about a year ago, CGFNS caught a fake certificate that somebody was trying to pass off, a fake CGFNS certificate. And that happened a number of times in my previous work. So those cases of, fake or falsified evaluation reports are pretty easy to detect, but the issue is they're not always brought to your attention. You don't know if they're being used, and the person who's using them isn't checking up on it. So I think the idea is to make sure that the third parties or the users of the reports are aware of the issue and are diligent, and that they know how to get official reports from you. They know how to verify them with you, and that, as Emily mentioned, that they receive them directly from you via secure and verifiable means.
Yeah. All of this has been so great. I think it's important for us to land on really the seriousness of this. That could be said across industry, but when you're talking about healthcare specifically, and you touched on this at the front end, Emily, and I just want to land here, this ultimately has an impact downstream on patient safety and the public good. And the reason why we're vigilant about this process, and others in our sector are as well, is because the training, the verified, validated training and skills of these healthcare professionals or nurses and other allied health workers has a downstream impact on care delivery, on coordinated care, and ultimately patient safety. So we can't be too vigilant about it, honestly, because it's so important. And we can wonder, as you did, Emily, why people would go through these backdoor means to put themselves in a caregiving role where there is risk and safety involved. But that vigilance is the reason why globally all stakeholders who have an interest in this are keeping a very close eye on it. I know you guys are at a lot of conferences talking about how this is detected and prevented, and what can be done to raise standards and set guardrails around all these things. And so I felt like it was important for us to say, ultimately, it's about healthcare delivery and the
100%.
quality of care delivery that we're supporting. I mean, we serve the global health workforce, but all of us together serve the global health system and patients around the world. So just wanted to land there. And I wanted to thank you guys so much for being on our podcast. We are newly launching, as you know. So this is one of our earlier episodes and really critical because I think it's probably a topic the average person doesn't think about, and even others that are connected to our industry and what we do may not be aware, again, of how much diligence is required to support this and to make sure that we're delivering to our stakeholders and to the regulatory bodies that we work with, that we're delivering consistent reviews on the applicant, folks that are coming through our doorway. So that brings us to the close of our episode today. And I just wanted to land on what I think is a really critical point to make as we've explored this topic. Obviously, the impact of these issues has a downstream effect on patient safety and quality of care and care delivery. So even though, we've been discussing how important fraud detection and prevention is when, we're assessing the individual and we're trying to determine, what the mobility of their careers can be, and, the access they might have to other countries and care systems. It's important to acknowledge that the rigor of this process and the discipline around ensuring high quality, credible, verifiable credentials is ultimately about making sure that we're positioning experienced health workers at the bedside, in the operative suite, or wherever these folks are going to be working, to be able to deliver high quality care. And that's just a reality that can't be fast tracked or sidestepped or worked around. That's the importance of this. So I thought it would be important for us to land there. I do want to say, Jason, Emily, thank you so much for being here, for sharing your expertise.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was great fun.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, folks, that's it for today's episode. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll hope you'll come back. We've got a whole lot more on the docket moving forward on this and similar subjects related to workforce development. Thanks. That's it for this episode of Care Anywhere. Thanks for joining us. We hope you'll tune in for future episodes where we will continue these powerful discussions about our global health workforce. If you missed any episodes, you can find them at cgfns.org/podcast or by subscribing to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. Just look for our podcast logo or search for Care Anywhere to find us. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.